Well, it happened. I got stuck. Months after running around through a routine, feeling mentally exhausted, and stumbling into a rut that seemed impossible to break. After several weeks of battling bronchitis, I found myself stuck in a mental loop. Rinse and repeat, day after day, without much progress. It's easy sometimes to feel like life is just one long, unchanging cycle. But here's the thing. I believe that even in these moments where one lacks momentum, there's a path towards renewal. And today's episode is all about that journey. How to recognize when you're stuck and how to find your way back to purpose. Welcome to my life after being stuck, where we explore stories of transformation, resilience, and finding new purpose. I'm your host, Steve Joseph. I'm excited to introduce my guest today, Jordan, a former entertainment lawyer who, after feeling stuck in a career that no longer served him, found his true purpose as a career transition coach. His story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to rewrite your story and to step into what's truly fulfilling you. So if you've ever felt like you're in a loop or simply looking for inspiration to move forward, stay tuned. And this is the My Life After podcast. Let's get started.
So Jordan, if I was writing your biography on the back of the book, what would I be writing?
The story of a guy who was never satisfied with what he was doing, was always very curious about what else he could be doing, and hopefully got there.
So
It's hard to say, right? It's like, am I still alive when you're writing this? Yeah.
it's something that I think a lot of us can relate to, right? And as we've talked about, and I talk a lot about on the show is just the transitions, the changes that occur in life, the forced change, the unforced change, and then whatever happens in between that makes us change from one chapter to another. And we'll talk a lot more about what you're doing now, just in terms of how you are enabling others to be better versions of themselves. But you had an interesting journey to get to where you are today, just in terms of doing law as a profession, entertainment law. A lot of people in law, like maybe you could say the same for other careers, are really coming to a chapter in their career very early that, you know what, this is not what I signed up for, or it is the workload or the burnout is a real thing. Like lawyers in their 30s are leaving the profession due to burnout. And I wanted to talk a bit more about burnout. I know on your webpage you have a section called Musings, and you talk about a lot about different topics. One of them is burnout. Can you talk about what burnout is by definition, how it impacted you? How does somebody know that they have it? And we could talk about after what they can do about it.
So burnout, there's a number of definitions for it, formal definitions. I tend to sort of go with how I like to view it, which is a lack of inner resourcefulness in order to attend to what life is calling you to do, right? So, and I think a lot of people don't realize they're burnt out. So that maybe is not part of the definition, but perhaps it's correlative with what it is to be burnt out. And so in my experience, it was, I don't know. I started feeling like I just couldn't really like bring myself to it was like deals, right? Like I was working on deals and they weren't complicated. It was stuff I'd done many times before, like simple paperwork. And, but I couldn't like get my head into it. And I found everything that I was called to do from a work perspective was overwhelming. And so things that used to be quite simple tasks, forget deal making, like just simple tasks even, I was like, oh, I'm too tired to do this, or I resent this. I don't want to do this. And then that started to bleed into like everything else. So it was like, around the time, for instance, that I started to feel very burnt out. we were also building a house. And so, all the micro decisions, you're making a million decisions, right? So, so all the decisions that we were being called on to make for building the house, also each time I was like, oh man, I can't handle this. Like, this is too much. Now that's crazy, because of course I can handle it, right? My entire life I was able to handle all this stuff. So something happened, I guess I don't know when, but at a point when, some people might call it like decision fatigue. And certainly that, I think, is something that happens a lot, not just with lawyers, but anybody who's in an advisory position, or profession. But I think in my case, and maybe perhaps, and some of the people I speak with about this as well, it's more just like this idea of like, nothing is making me interested in this or wanting to do this, despite the fact that I know I can, right? And so this dissonance starts to, I guess, creep in of, I know I'm able to, I've done it before. For some reason now I feel like I can't. And then you don't really recharge either, because you're throwing, to use like an investment term, like you're throwing good money after bad at that point, right? And so you're just trying to you're trying to get things done the way you've always known how to do it, but because that's the way they got you burnt out in the first place, it's not going to work. You just don't realize it, right? Anyhow, I know that's all over the place, but that's my kind of personal experience
Well,
with it.
you hit a few things there that I think a lot of us can resonate with, in terms of, you get to a point in your life where you're kind of in cruise control. Maybe you have a family, house, mortgage, bills, car, and all of those things. And you are just in that mode of maybe coping with your workload, coping with the increased requirements and demands of life, because that's what life is. We can prepare for life in whatever way, shape, or form, but there are certain things that happen, like health wise, maybe to oneself or a family member, or losing a job, or any of those things, which, is something that I've been dealing with the last few months. And where you just cope and cope and cope. But one of the things that you also don't realize that you're doing is, there's a physical impact to this. There's an impact to your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system. And especially if you're in maybe a toxic environment, you're constantly in fight or flight mode. So you're always reacting max. You're either maximum reaction to everything, and then when you don't perceive a threat, you go into complete, like, okay, I can rest. I don't want to make any decisions. I just want to chill, and I'll be ready to go for the next thing, and then go full force. That's very tiring, right? It's very tiring. And a lot of us find ourselves in those situations, in our 30s, our 40s, and there's a lot of different impacts to that. Now, for you personally, when you were feeling this, what was kind of the inflection point while you were in your career that said, okay, I'm feeling this way, this is what I'm experiencing? How did you know that you were experiencing it, and what made you feel like, I need to do something else, like my purpose is something else?
Good question. The purpose question was always kind of niggling. So, I don't want to speak for anybody else who's been to law school. A lot of lawyers, colleagues I know, tend to say this, though, that law school is a good thing. Like, it's a good place to go for smart people who don't know what to do. So there's a bit of like a default to that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But in my experience, going was great. I learned a ton. I don't regret it at all. But once you're there, you're kind of on a path. It's not, and when I say you're on a path, we're all on a path, but I mean, it's more like it's a well-worn groove. So the path is fair. It takes effort. Let me put it this way. It takes a lot of effort to define your own path in the profession. And sometimes that effort just seems like, why bother? Like, I can go get a job, and it's not hard to get a job. Like, it feels like it's hard to get a job when you're at that stage, but you can get a job. And it may not be a Bay Street job or a Wall Street job or the exact job you want. It may not pay you as much as you wanted. It may not be the exact area of work you want to focus on, but you're hireable. We're lawyers. So you can start with that, and then once you're in that kind of path, at least what a lot of folks have told me, especially people I work with, is that like, I don't know what to do because this is too easy. I'm in this groove. I have blinders on. Like, why? It's going to be much harder to get off this track than to stay on it. Even if I don't like being on it. So I think there's that first question, right? Of just like the sunken cost fallacy of like, oh, I've spent so much time on this already. I've spent, money and effort and intellectual resources on this, and I'm good at it. Like, most people are good at what they're doing. So hopefully, and there's no question that they're smart. So, it's like, I'm here. Why change it? Why break it? Why fix it if it's not broken? So there's this other interesting question, which is like, well, what does it mean for it to be broken? And I think people have set this bar of brokenness to be so high. And I know I did that for myself too, because I was like, well, everything's fine. And I mean, when you say everything is fine, like part of it's like, do you want it to be fine? I don't know. And I just sort of took that approach, despite the fact that I had like a very, very unconventional path. I was out on my own as a lawyer a year out of law, or after being called. I articled on Bay Street. It was great. I value that experience. It opened up a whole world to me that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise. But it wasn't. They knew it wasn't for me. I knew it wasn't for me. So I didn't get hired back at the law firm that I articled at. And then I was like, well, I'm out. Like, I just don't want to do this. I was like, because in my mind, I was like, great. Like, I've been liberated from this thing that I've only been doing because I, quote, should be doing it. Right. I didn't really know what to do. So I just putzed around a little with like taught yoga. I was photographing. I was doing a little bit of like doc review, which is an easy way to make money as an unemployed lawyer back then. And I got involved with like a film festival that we ran for 10 years after. And so it was interesting how like having nothing to do opened up all these opportunities for things to do. Like boredom is a great way to be creative if you just let yourself. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was a path that I fell onto, and I found just much harder to get off it. And then once, for me, in terms of like knowing when it was time to get off, that was hard because it had always been kind of on me. Like, I know this is not what I want to do forever, but I don't know what else to do. And the longer I do this, the harder it is to get off. And at one point, my therapist said to me, she's like, it's going to be easier to get out of this at 40 than at 50. I mean, she's right. Like, I'm 40, I'll be 43 in a month. So, and I left practice 3 years ago. My kids would be at 50, 13, and 11. I don't know what life's going to look like then, but I know it would be much harder, right? Because, to take a Buddhist approach to it, I have far more attachments. So to rid myself of those attachments in the future might be a little harder than ridding myself of them at 40. And also just, life's different, right? It's easier to make those shifts when you're younger and you have more, at least I think it is, when you're younger and you're a little more nimble.
I think the timeline of one's life plays into that factor, right? So we finish school, mid-20s, late 20s. If you do post-grad, you want a few years of settling into a career and finding your groove. Call it, now you're in your mid-30s, late 30s. And then by the time you hit 40, you've done something maybe for about 10 years. And you're at that point where, hey, can I keep doing this forever? And if I can't, what would I rather be doing? And what's the cost of doing those things? But also for me, because I was in my early 40s when I left banking and I joined a fintech. And, no, I don't believe any job is safe and secure anymore. I think, those days are gone. But one of the things that I saw when I was in banking was some people were let go a lot earlier than they planned for or thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, they were maybe too expensive to go somewhere else. very easily. Maybe they didn't have the marketable skill sets, and maybe they were also at a chapter in their life where, hey, there's a lot more younger people that are cheaper that could do very similar things. So why would they? Right. And so you don't have a
Yeah.
lot of optionality. So for me, I thought, okay, I'll leave in my early 40s. I'll try something new. If it works, great. And if it doesn't, I have other things that I could fall back on. And it's, for me, the risk worth taking, because complacency and just staying somewhere kind of eats away at you over time. And, it'll impact you in different ways, right? So I think it's very important for people these days to realize that and understand that. And especially when you look at burnout, every firm is making everybody do a lot more with a lot less resources, right? They're letting people go. All of a sudden, two people's job is one person's job, and you're the lucky one that stayed, quote unquote. Now you got to now,
Yeah.
now you got to figure it out. Which,
Yeah.
for me, when I look at an industry like the legal industry, um, I find it interesting when technology comes into place, legal tech, and you're seeing AI kind of fill the role of maybe what a lot of articling students used to do, right? And
Mhm.
will this technology shift offset some of that burnout? But then there will be a drastic reduction in the number of lawyers that are going to be in this space, right? I think there's consolidation happening everywhere with
Mhm.
legal tech, or sorry, with AI. Uh, Also, the AI industry had a rude awakening last week with DeepSeek coming in and saying we could do everything you're doing, but for a lot cheaper, and we're going to make it all open source AI. Anybody can use our algorithms, right? Our models,
Yeah.
and turning things over on their head. So I think we're going to be constantly in this state of flux, so to speak. So you left law and you went on this path now to help people transition in their career, to help people cultivate their purpose. So let's talk about that a bit more. First of all, how did you
Sure.
train to be, um, I don't want to say coach because you don't like the term coach.
No, coach is fine. It's life coach. I have this weird hang up around the term. It's just, I
Yeah,
don't know. Everything's about life, right? So it's like, it's kind of redundant, but I don't know. I'd like to be a little more
sure.
focused.
So first of all, how did you get the designation?
So so to be clear, like, anybody can call themselves a coach. Like, there's no regulation around this, which perhaps is an inherent industry issue, but I digress from that. So I first of all, when I left practice, I took about a year off, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had a lot of ideas, wasn't really sure what I was going to execute on. I still have a lot of ideas, so who knows? I might execute on other things, but we'll see. But one thing that I knew for sure was I love being in a position of speaking with people regularly. I found that the most rewarding part of being a lawyer was the relationships I had with clients, especially the long-term relationships. And I enjoyed certain parts of working with my clients and being a trusted advisor to them. But in those conversations, I way more enjoyed having like the talks about personal stuff than I did about, when are we closing this deal, and the minutia like that. And so, despite the fact that it's all part and parcel, like it's all tied up, I also noticed though that after many years, a lot of clients and again, this is just normal when you're in a client business. At least I think it is. Like, you develop relationships that go beyond simply just like the actual transactional stuff. And I always really valued that. And then I found that my relationships with the clients go beyond this, and they come to me with other things that are not, they're not, in lawyer terms, they're not billable. But also, I mean, some lawyers might bill for them. I didn't. But also, like, they're real life things. Like, it's not, I was in the entertainment business, so you have to remember that it's very high risk, and it's very personal. And so there's a lot of not only personal, like, invested cash risk that producers have in projects, but there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of creativity, there's personalities, there's a lot going on. And so that comes to the fore a lot of the time. Maybe not explicitly in your negotiations with opposing counsel or agents, but certainly, when you're having your sidebar conversations, things come up. So I always enjoyed that. So I knew that going forward, there had to be something like that. And on the advice / insight of, a number of people I trust, they were like, you should consider either therapy or being a therapist. I was already in therapy, but being a therapist or maybe getting into coaching. And I had worked with a therapist for a very long time. I'd worked with coaches over the years. I knew the difference. I enjoyed both. And so I was like, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, which is kind of a lie. I had thought about it many times over the years. I just never really gave it much credence. And then I started doing my research. We had a newborn. I was like, I'm not going back to school for 3 years right now. But I found a coaching program in San Francisco called New Ventures West. So the way they work is it's integral coaching. It's based in integral psychology, which, to make a long story short, is approaching yourself as holistic and fundamentally working with like your head, body, and emotional parts to integrate them, right, and find alignment in terms of how you make your decisions. And so some people might view that as woo woo. I don't know. I like it. So I think it's far more realistic, frankly, than just looking at things from a strictly analytic viewpoint. And anyhow, so signed up for that. That took a year. It was fairly intense. It was a lot of work. I enjoyed it. And that was it. As part of the program, you have to start taking clients fairly early. So took on my first pro bono clients, I guess, 6 months into my program to get my hours, and then finished last February. So I guess it's just a year out now, but I mean, sometimes it feels shorter, sometimes it feels longer. But yeah, I enjoy the work. I mean, I love speaking with people. And it's interesting how most of the time people will come to me with stuff that I know and understand from experience, burnout, career change, wanting more creativity in your work, having an unfulfilled ambition to, I don't know, be an artist or a producer or something. And it's odd because you end up kind of, I don't want to, this may sound like transference or projection in psychological terms, but in a lot of ways you end up kind of helping yourself by helping other people through what are sometimes similar issues. They're of course never the same because everybody's different and brings their own thing to the table. But it's incredibly rewarding. And it's always about, like, I have one client now who, he's like, I hate what I do. I don't know what to do. They're a consultant, they're paid very well. They've been doing this a long time. They're very good at it. But really, it's not about the work at all. It's about something else. It's and that's what's interesting to me, right? It's like getting underneath the surface issue and to find what's actually motivating the stuckness and how do we get you out of that, right? So really, the work is about change, and that kind of manifests itself in every possible area. It just so happens that, for me, the biggest change in my life was around, well, probably 2, maybe 3: getting married, having kids, leaving a long-standing career. And so that one has been the one that I've looked into the most and I've always had the most questions about. And so I find working with people around that same thing and writing about it as well is really interesting. So yeah, different than law, but fun.
The one thing that I really resonate with as well is that feeling of being stuck. And I want to explore that a bit more in terms of feeling stuck. A lot of people that I talk to feel stuck. And you're right, once we have certain things in life, it's hard to leave something because you're used to a certain level of income to pay for the things that you have kind of built around you. And to leave that, take a cut and start somewhere else really prohibits people from making changes, and they find a way to be stuck or to live in that stuckiness, right? Are
Yeah.
there what patterns do you see in people that make them feel stuck?
One is actually like literally physical stuckness. They don't move. They don't exercise. They don't have a connection with like their own internal muscular resource, for lack of a better term. And so it's very hard to embody the idea of moving if you don't know what it feels like literally feels like to move, right? So oftentimes with my clients, there will be, if not always, there will be some element of we need to bring some sort of movement in. Now that might be running, that might be, I have one client that, for instance, she was at a point in life when she's in her 60s. She'd been working a very long time, super stable career. She wanted to start transitioning out into retirement, but not cold turkey. Like she wanted to do it slowly, but she was very, very afraid of leaving the safety of the work. And I was like, why don't you try rock climbing? It's totally safe, but like you're creating more distance between yourself and like this floor, quote unquote, that you have with work. And you'll start to like get the sense of, oh, I can create some distance. I'm not going to fall and break my neck. And that sort of thing can be actually incredibly powerful. For others, maybe it's something slower like yoga or Tai Chi, or, maybe they need something more intuitive. But in any event, that's one thing that I find is very tangible. And it's outside of the normal way a lot of us get stuck, which is we think our way into stuckness, right? So many of us in these, let's call them thinking or knowledge professions, right? We're not working with our hands. We are not working out in the fields, right? We are at a desk writing, usually on a computer screen. So it requires very little physical movement, but also it requires a lot of like mental movement. And so the only tool we now know how we are comfortable using to solve our problem is our brain, and or thinking, because our brain's kind of involved in everything. And so we think and think and think and think, but like, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything is going to look like a nail, right? So not every problem in life is a nail. So we have to use something different in order to get out of the stuckness. So sometimes, for instance, like if I have a client who's like going back to what I said about boredom before, right? If I have a client who is just thinking like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And why don't I try this? And I'm going to work harder, and I'm going to think more, and I'm going to ruminate, right? It's like you're going to burn yourself out. There's almost no question. You're going to burn yourself out on that. But also it's not leaving any space for something to arise on its own. So in that case, like, meditation is the obvious kind of easy answer, but there's other things like one thing I sometimes have people do is just, if you work beside a window, right? Just stare out the window for 10 minutes, find something that you can look at like very intently, and then let's just like catalog every detail about that thing. If that's a doorknob, great. Tell me everything you can tell me about that doorknob in 10 minutes. And somehow that breaks the cycle of like trying to solve problems with our head, right? Because it all of a sudden creates space for other things to enter, because all we're really doing is being micro-focused on this little thing. It's also a really easy way to get bored, right? So that's another kind of thing we can do. But then there's another more general idea, which is not mine. I mean, none of these are my ideas. I borrow all this stuff from people, but from other people and writers. But the only way to get unstuck is to get unstuck, right? So it doesn't matter really what movement you quote unquote movement you take or action you take. It's simply just a matter of taking action. So with every client, and I am pretty sure it's every client. I always quote a poem by David White called "The Next Close-In Step," which I'm not going to quote it now, but to paraphrase, just look at the next immediate thing you can do, right? It does not need to be the top of the mountain. It's just the first step and the easiest one. So if I have a client whose goal was ultimately, I want to own a restaurant. This person had no knowledge, business involvement in the restaurant world at all. This was like a very lofty goal. And I was like, okay, I mean, if that's really where you want to aim, then what are you going to do? And he's like, well, I don't know, because it's so hard. And how am I going to raise the money? And where am I going to find a location? And how am I going to learn? And I was like, wait a minute. What is like the one easiest thing you can do right now to find out about whether this even makes sense? He's like, well, I have a friend who works in the restaurant business. I'm like, can you call them? Yes. I'm like, can you have lunch with them? Yes. Okay, do that. Like it's just like, you want to be a black belt in karate? There's a lot of belts you need to get through before you become a black belt. And before you get to any of that, you need to like actually find a studio where you can go learn, right? And then make sure they're even willing to take
Yeah,
you.
I mean,
So
I'm learning jujitsu, my daughter and and I think jujitsu is one of the martial arts that it takes the longest to get a black belt, right? It could take many years, and the main thing is consistency. Everyone says it's just consistency, just going in, just
yeah,
showing up every day. And when I show up, I've my consistency, has been kind of thrown off the last few months, but I'm back. I'm showing up as often as I can. And sometimes it's a 1% increase from the previous lesson. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 10. It's never going to be 100, and it's never going to be 50. But just showing up every day and chipping away at it. And I think we're used to the Instagrat, like we're used to just getting big bang. I see it a lot with the younger generation, and it's partly our fault as well, that, hey, you want something, boom, Amazon, it's here, right? Or you want a
yeah.
video game, you can download it, whereas before we had to save up and then go to Consumers Distributing. I don't know if you remember that show at that store, write it
Yes.
down. And
Oh man, behind the
yeah,
glass,
yeah,
the
it
catalog.
was
I
great.
love
And
that.
the anticipation of this Nintendo arriving, it was awesome. But we're
Yeah.
living in this world where we're so sedentary. And you're right, we're physically stuck. We're sitting where, they say sitting down is the new smoking, right? It's literally,
Yeah.
it's the new smoking. But the other thing is, to your point about we're thinking, we're not even doing that anymore. I'll admit, I'm using AI now for a lot of things. I'm putting down my
Mhm.
thoughts, it's spitting out whatever. I will read it, revise it, add more input to it. But even the thinking is being outsourced now. And so we're moving into this world. We are engineering our own extinction. Unless we find better ways and other ways to be more physically active, physically more involved in a product or service that we are providing, consumer goods or whatever it is, whatever our vocation is, we are really cocooning ourselves into this hole. And it's going to be really tough to get out of, right? If we're seeing AI companies being displaced, I mean, could you imagine what, like, we're like Neanderthals now compared to the AI machines, right? And a few years ago, they had the intelligence of an elementary school student. Now they're a PhD student, and before you know it, they're well above that. So it's
Mhm.
scary. And so when we find ourselves in these particular situations that we're stuck, it really takes a lot to break out of it. For me, what really drives me is, unfortunately, I've known quite a few people in, say, the last 15 years that have passed away at whatever age I was at that time. And this past year, a
Mm.
few colleagues, a few years older, but they were not old. And for me, one of the driving forces is, I don't want my tombstone isn't written yet. It's not that whatever I did, that vocation, in my neighborhood, we live in an old area. So they have the plaque saying builder and roofer or um, spinster, whatever it was. Uh, I'm not ready for mine yet. And
Yeah.
that's what's really driving me to do things like this podcast, to do things like engage in people outside of my immediate ecosystem, to see what else is out there and motivate people to say, hey, look, you can do what you're doing, but you can also do other things and be successful, right? An uncle of mine gave me a book about an SAS soldier many years ago. It was called Bravo 20. And it was the first time I learned about the British SAS. And one of the things he told me was, these guys are trained that you can drop them in the middle of the jungle with nothing and they will survive, right? And
Hmm.
I always think about that if you are somebody who's driven, you learn to learn, and you have an aptitude to connect with people and connect with your goals, you can do anything and be successful, right? And I think for you, when I look at you, you and I have only met recently through your brother who I worked with, but
Yeah.
I think what you would have needed to succeed personally and educationally in law, you can apply that to a lot of things. At the end of the day, we go to school just to learn to learn. We're not, you know, going to do those things forever, or that we have to do those things forever. Which brings me to another point that you talk about on your website as well, the importance of being curious. And one of my guests in a previous episode played for the Argos, Andre Talbot. He's a therapist now, but he was a receiver and slot back for the Toronto Argos. And one of the things that he talked about is being curious. And I think as adults, we don't realize the importance of this word. We feel like we are, we have everything around us. We don't need to explore anymore. And this was one of the things when I went through a separation, I used this time to recreate passions in life. So I learned how to weld. I learned how to sing. I learned, explored photography. I was doing carpentry. I just put myself out there because I had some great people in my ecosystem, but I wasn't learning new things. And so I wanted to ask you, how does curiosity and ambition remove someone from that stuckness? And I think stuckness should be the name of a book if you ever write one. I think it would be a good one, but
I'll hold you to that. I may do that.
But can you talk about that a bit more? Why being curious is important? Maybe that is that first step that you talked about.
There's something about learning that gets us out of our, I think, like, I don't pretend to be any sort of expert on any of this. I haven't done any research. I'm sure there are any real research. I'm sure there's clinical research on all of this. But in my experience personally and working with other people, there's something about learning that gets us out of habitual thinking, right? And to go something we were talking about earlier, showing up, like, to quote Woody Allen, I don't know if I should do that anymore or not, but I will, because, this is true. Like 99% of life is showing up, and showing up it applies everywhere. If you're an artist, showing up at your studio, right? That's where the work gets done. If you are, a football player, showing up on the field, right? Showing up for practice, showing up for your games. If you are a writer, showing up at your desk every day and writing, right? So if you're in any sort of business and you have to attend conferences, just showing up is like almost all the work, right? So, it really is true. I've always found it to be true anyhow. And it's very easy to get stuck when we stop showing up, right? And the world has kind of made it easy to not show up. We don't need to go places as often as we used to. There's no consumers distributing, right? We get dopamine hits way easier and way faster than we used to, meaning we need to keep them up all the time, right? And, our world has gotten much smaller on account of, most of our life is in this little rectangle black screen, right? So anyhow, I know I've kind of gone on a bit of a tangent on the question there, but to get back to it, the curiosity part is looking outside of that little black screen, basically, right? The smaller we make our window, the harder it is to learn. And so, we need to, I know maybe I'm overusing this, but like most of the time when you're looking at a cell phone, right, you're looking down and like, you don't really know what's going on around you, right? You need to look up. Like, you need to turn your head and look around and get curious about what's happening out there, because first of all, opportunity will show up if you're paying attention. It's very easy to miss opportunity if you're not looking around. So that's number one. But number two is that when we are learning and we are engaging in interests, we start to feel more empowered, and we start to realize, oh, wait a minute, I learned this new skill. Like you said, you took up singing, right? I'm sure that was daunting when you started. And what did you learn about yourself through the process of singing or learning singing?
This may sound like the oddest response, but I learned how to breathe. And I realized in this fight or flight mode, my breathing was so shallow that
Yeah.
I was depleting myself even more. To be able to take large, deep belly breaths gave me the space and the room to perform more cognitively. It sounds really silly, but it
Not at all.
it reduced that fight or flight mode, and now I could think. Right, so that was the first step.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So look at that. Right. Learning something as, I don't want to say it's simple. Singing is not simple, but learning something like singing opened up a whole other world to you of capability. Right. And a sense of self-empowerment that, oh, I don't need to be in a state of sympathetic, nervous system response all the time, which fundamentally, by the way, is burnout. Right. Like if we're in this state all the time, it's very hard to get out of it. Everything is a threat. So I should add to that, by the way, that like there's a state of freeze that one can get into also, and that's also part of burnout, right? Or being stuck, I should say. It's like, oh, I'm not going to do anything because I'm too afraid of the negative outcome, and I'm too afraid of the positive outcome. Like some people are just afraid of moving, right? It's a deeper question, but it's there. So, like some people I know are afraid of success as much as they're afraid of failure, if not more. So anyhow, the curiosity thing is I think incredibly powerful for those reasons. And by the way, that's curiosity outwards, right? Then there's like curiosity inwards. We need to get curious about ourselves. Like, what is it that I actually want? Who am I actually, right? Like, what is my soul?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people either think that's a crazy question or simply don't want to ask it because they might not want the answer. Sometimes the answer is like, oh man, like that means everything in my life doesn't really line up. And now what do I do? Right?
Imposter
This is called
syndrome is a big thing, right? I mean, we have what our personal alignment is. We have our outward persona, and if you are working in a job that pays a lot of money, there's an ecosystem built around it as well, right? There's joining a ski club or, living in a nice area, wearing nice clothes and driving nice cars. And then part of you is like, has to maintain that sometimes even when you don't want to, even when your goals have changed, your priorities have changed and you want to detach from it, but you find it hard to.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Like there's an identity question that comes along with all of this as well. So it's loaded. Like especially when people make career changes, and it's not just high paying professions, there's stuff that is attached to what we choose to do with our lives for work it gets tied up with us. And separating those two, untying that knot is complicated. It can be anyway. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And maybe it should be, I don't know. But you have to look at the knot or else you can't untie it. And that's the curiosity part, right? Or at least it's half the curiosity part. Because you got to look out and you got to look in, and together you can, you might be able to figure it out.
How important is vulnerability to somebody that you are working with? How important is it for them to be vulnerable? And are the results better if they are?
Hard to say. Okay, so vulnerability I find to be critical for both myself and for the people I'm working with. I need to be quite vulnerable to how I feel around them and with what they're saying, because a lot of the time I'm trusting my own emotional sense to guide me to my next question with them. It's not just a fact-finding mission, right? Like it's tuning into what else is attuning myself to what they are experiencing. So it's a little harder than simply just listening.
What is maybe an experience that you've had that you share with them that maybe exemplifies or gives an example of some of the vulnerabilities you've had in your life that have caused you to change or caused you or motivated you to change? Can you give an example of something?
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
peeling back the layers here.
Yeah, well, yeah. My best friend described me as an onion in my wedding, in his wedding speech for me. So yeah, there you go. So my employees at the time I left law, as well as some clients, I was very vulnerable around with. I was like, I cried to them. I was like, look, I'm just telling you, like, I'm not going to be doing this much longer. I can't handle this anymore. By the way, for me, that was less about the volume of work, and it was more about just like the nature of me, and just like this doesn't line up with who I am anymore. And either the work changed or I changed. I don't know. I'm never going to know. I know I will not know that, and I need to be okay with that. So that was hard because, for many years I had to hold myself up as being this, like, not emotionless, but like tough. I'll get through any deal. I'll work as long as I have to. And, I need to be the rock because in these deals, because, that's what I'm paid to do. Right. So sort of taking off that mask was incredibly hard. And in a lot of ways, like, it felt like it wasn't a failure, but at the time it felt like a failure. So it was sort of like being willing to feel failure, which is like it's a shitty feeling. So that would be then. With clients now, I'm often, I don't divulge anything about myself really unless I'm asked, and even then I need to be somewhat selective. But I have one client now, we've been working together for a while, and she asked, like, well, what was it like for you, like when you quit? And I was very honest. I was like, look, like, I was really depressed, and like I didn't really know what I was going to do, and it was incredibly scary. It's still scary. And I'm not sure what life will bring on this new path, and it's not that I need to be okay with it, but it's certainly being, to use some more flowery language, it's like to sit in the face of this, of like what is inevitably a mystery, and just keep going.
The path to success, the irony is the path to success is wrought with failure, right? And to fully feel like you are successful and not have encountered failure, to me, is like the ultimate emperor wearing new clothes, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. We've gone through chapters in our life, many of us, whatever chapter we're at, different types of failure. And I don't know if it gets worse, if the feeling of failure gets worse as you get older, but then you compound it with the experience you have of the successes and the friendships and the community that you have around you. And, for me, going through experiences of failure, I've obviously felt the lows, and you take it personally and you go through a roller coaster of emotions, but then you realize, if you're a good person and you've had success in other areas of your life, and you have a community around you that will remind you of that. And I really have leaned on that community of friends and family. And they've reminded me of these things that, hey, you've had many successes and many victories, and everything happens for a reason, and there's a stepping stone. And sometimes we find ourselves in areas in life that maybe weren't the right thing for us, but they felt at the time, right? And I find vulnerability one of the strongest aspects for great leaders. Every great leader that I have experienced has actually, at the right time and at the right moment and very selectively, shown vulnerability. And that vulnerability motivates people even more. They're saying, because this person that's leading us is not this impenetrable force of armor. They've actually had certain, certain failures and whatnot, but they've overcome them and they're stronger.
Well, they're
right?
they're a human.
Absolutely.
Right? Like you humanize you. We shouldn't need to humanize ourselves, but Oftentimes, especially leaders need to, because they're on a pedestal and they need to, quote, rule in a certain way. And, showing your I use this all the time. So the root word of vulnerability is vulnus, which is Latin for wound.
Interesting.
And so, when we're talking about vulnerability, we're really just talking about exposing our wounds. And in some cases, being willing to throw salt on them, right? But, that's how you build resilience. Like, you need to be willing to go ahead and fail, feel the wound, right? And then keep going. So it's like, I used to have, when I was practicing law, I had a lot of young lawyers come to me and be like, I want to go out on my own, or I want to try this, or I want to try that. And I'm like, well, why aren't you doing it? And they're like, well, I'm scared. What if I fail? I was like, well, that's the cue, man. Like, the cue, if you're afraid, do it. I mean, and I don't mean like walk into traffic, but like, you're smart. But if you can recognize you have fear, that's probably the reason you should be doing it. It's very counterintuitive.
Well, for me, no, I think you're exactly right. For me, I was afraid to leave banking and join that fintech because I just had more security there. But for me, the fear of not trying something was worse. The fear of not knowing was worse. And if I lived a long and healthy life and I'm hopefully sitting on a beach chair on a beach somewhere warm and sunny, and I look back on my life, will I have regrets? And that would have been one that I would have had regretted, right? So that's the thing. Fear is another driving factor and a motivating factor that, changes the course of a lot of things. So, definitely. And so as we kind of wrap up, we've talked about a lot of things, your transition from law to now this profession of enabling people to be better versions of themselves. 5 years from now, what does the better version of you look like? You're helping people in their journey. And what is your milestone to say, hey, I set on this path. In 5 years, this is where I want to be. And what are the marks to the metrics along the way that would make you feel that you achieved what you set out to do?
Wow. Hard question. Okay. I can break it down into like compartments. Sure. So by external like data metrics, 5 years from now, if I've worked with 250 people, to help them make a transition that they're happy with, then that to me would be a great marker of success. If I've written a book, which, what did we say we're calling
Stuckness.
it? Stuckness.
I'll do the forward.
So if you'll do the forward. Yeah, we already know what you're going to write on the back. So if I've written a book, if I've written Stuckness, that would be great. That's kind of it from that perspective. Like, I could talk about dollars, but like, that's not, I don't know what that looks like. I've never been pushed that much by money with this stuff. Even in law, I was like, as long as I'm working, I'm happy. Like, I need money, but I'm not measuring this by the outcome, like the financial outcomes. Maybe I should, I don't know. Then internal measures, being a more present dad, being a more present husband. Those are probably the biggest ones for me. Still being in, good shape. I'm a runner. I work out almost every day. If in 5 years I've run at least one marathon, I'll be happy. I've only done a half, so I'd like to at least get one. And then other things, sort of I guess these would be personal, but like if my art practice could be revitalized, by me, nobody else is going to do it, then that would be a huge marker of success, because that would really be me getting out of my own way. So that's like my own kind of work. In 10 years, if I could say I'm a Jungian analyst, that would be a
A
big
what
one.
analyst? Sorry,
But that's like a Jungian analyst. That's like my super
is
long-term goal. An analyst trained in Jungian psychology.
okay. I don't know what. So what is that
So like,
psychology? I've never heard of it.
so Carl Jung, C.G. Jung, he was the, I don't want to use the term protege, but let's just say he was a protege of Freud.
Okay.
And he has his own school of psychology that I find very
Okay.
interesting. But it's hard to get into the school. It's very selective. It takes a lot of years. And I don't have a master's, so that's another hurdle I'll have to get over. But I digress. Yeah, those are the big ones. Good question. I should write these down. I know this is the sort of thing that it's odd for a guy who works with people on setting goals. I don't really set my own that often. Wait, what about
as
you?
they say, never buy a mechanic's car.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you? I'm curious.
Good question. For me, I've been a creator like you as well. Photography, art, sculptures, and it's a part of me that's been dormant as well. Doing this podcast, actually, I started it last spring of 2024, and it has, apart from just meeting with interesting people outside of my ecosystem,
Yeah.
It's really connected me with my voice, and it's helping me define my purpose into the future. So for me, I have my daytime career in finance and fintech and that part of my life, which is kind of, the mainstay for now. But I would love to have grown this podcast to a point where I have a huge following. People are learning things. I am hosting retreats where people can empower themselves, find their voice, and become better versions of themselves, especially maybe when it comes to men's health. I think men can do a better job with their health and emotional well-being. So I would love to have something in place that would address that. So that's for me my 5-year goal. So we'll see. We can chat then and see see how give ourselves a report card.
I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for you.
I'm rooting for you too. And yeah,
Thank
Jordan,
you.
this was great. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's really important for people to realize that a lot of us follow that path. Sometimes that path is put forward by our parents, and sometimes it's by our by life that says, hey, you need to achieve what you can from an education perspective and then follow that road because that's going to be stable and pay bills, etc. A lot of us, our parents, they didn't do what they loved. They just loved what they came home to at the end of the day, right? And they did what they did to pay the bills. We grew up in a time where everyone fed down our throat, oh, you got to love what you do. You got to love it. Otherwise, you'll never be good at it. And we have this revelation in our 40s of, oh my God, I've been doing what I've been doing for so long and I don't love it. Like, I need to do something else just to feel something, right? And I'm glad you're on this journey pursuing that.
Yeah, trying. Worst case scenario, I'll just go back to doing something I don't like. But
Hopefully not.
Thank you for joining us today on My Life After Being Stuck. Today's conversation with Jordan was a reminder that even when life feels like a never-ending loop, there's always a way to break free and to find a new purpose. If you're feeling stuck right now, remember, your next chapter is still unwritten, and it's never too late to start. Take small steps, seek support, and trust that momentum will return. And personally, I want to say that I'm right there with you. After months of feeling exhausted and out of sync, I'm grateful for the spark of inspiration from my wife during a walk that reignited my own journey. If I can do it, so can you. We're in this together. Remember, you're not alone. Your journey is to move forward. Until next time, I'm your host, Steve Joseph. Keep pushing, keep growing, and keep writing your new story.